right, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Before I turn things over to today's presenter, I would just like to go through very quickly how to ask questions. There is a chat feature in the WebEx Event Center, so please use the chat feature to ask any questions that you have. I will pass them on to today's presenter, who will answer them as best he can. In the event that he is not able to answer those questions, we will get answers and get back to you as soon as we can. Our original presenter today was not able to attend and had to back out. Fortunately, our own food safety specialist, Jeff Hall, has stepped up to the role and will be presenting today's material. And I'll hand things over to him. Jeff?
Okay. Thanks very much, Jason. And just want to confirm, can you see the first slide?
Yeah, we're all good.
Okay, perfect, great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon on this lovely Friday before the Canada Day long weekend. You must really care about this topic to spend your time with us this afternoon, and we do appreciate it. I'd like to thank NSF for the presentation. As Jason has noted, unfortunately, there was some last-minute stuff, and they weren't able to make it. So I will do my best to present the information on their behalf. And any questions I can't answer, we will certainly circle back with NSF and then get those answers out to the members. I also always like to thank the members who participated during this last few years around the Safe Food for Canadians Act, and of course the new regulations, which just came out about 2 weeks ago. And you know, we always need the input from the membership to make sure we can represent you guys properly to government. And as always, folks do tend to step up when we ask. So thank you very much. So with that done, I will get started here. So this is a brief summary of the agenda. We'll talk a little bit about GFSI. I'm going to touch very briefly on Canada Gap. The GFSI schemes, I'm just going to mention primarily. We're going to do some discussion on FSMA, because folks may not be as aware of it as the Safe Food for Canadians, but I will touch on that as well. And then we'll talk about how the GFSI aligns with FSMA and SFC and some of the gaps that are out there. And then we'll just do a wrap-up under the conclusion. And then, as Jason noted, we will then get into the question period, if you have any. So one of the commonly asked questions that we do here is if you're working on a GFSI benchmark scheme already in your facility, do you have to worry about FSMA or SFCA? So the way I'd answer this question is worry? No, I wouldn't worry about it. Do you have to verify you are in compliance with FSMA or the Safe Food for Canadians Act? Yes, you always have to verify you're in compliance when changes to regulations or new regulations come out. But certainly, if you're already working under a GFSI scheme, you're going to be well along the road to having the pieces in place that ensures that you will be compliant. There's always a couple of little twists and turns here and there when it comes to regulations that you might have to make a tweak or add another feature to your program. But generally, you know, if you're working under GFSI, you're going to have most of the pieces in place. And in a number of cases, you will have exceeded them. So just for those who don't know, GFSI stands for the Global Food Safety Initiative. GFSI started a number of years ago. I want to say probably between 15 and 20 years ago, I would say now. And it actually kind of developed out of Europe, where the supplier community there was becoming just beaten down with audit fatigue. So the large retailers got together. They created the first scheme, which is the BRC, the British Retail Consortium, and that kind of spawned off the GFSI. GFSI's mission, as it says there, is to provide continuous improvement in food safety management systems to ensure confidence in delivery of safe food to consumers worldwide. The most important word in that entire statement is worldwide. The benchmark GFSI schemes are recognized around the globe. So if you've got a Canada Gap, for example, in China, it is equivalent to the Canada Gap program in Canada when it comes to food safety. The other thing that's very important to remember is GFSI only deals with food safety. It does not deal with quality. It does not deal with human rights or worker conditions or sustainability. It only deals with the food safety standard. A number of the certification bodies will add on other components that deal with quality or deal with workers' conditions and things like that. But they are not part of the GFSI certification. That's kind of an added cost, an added benefit that the certification bodies provide. So it's important to remember when you hear GFSI, you should only be thinking food safety. GFSI as an organization does not do certification. GFSI develops the overarching standards, set of rules basically, that certifying bodies have to maintain or adhere to if they want their particular program to be initially benchmarked as GFSI compliant, and then as GFSI goes from version to version, they have to make those updates once again to maintain that recognition. It is the certification bodies which provide the information when it comes to the audits and certifying to the particular schemes. I've just switched the slide here. Here are the four main objectives of GFSI. It's important to understand that as a global organization, GFSI does an excellent job in linking up various food safety professionals. They hold one for sure, and it may actually be two now, kind of global conferences where the certification bodies attend, the auditors can attend, and basically it's open to anyone who's involved with GFSI as well as the folks whose facilities get audited and certified. And they're always trying to improve the program and incorporate changes which develop over the years. Food safety, like every other part of a business, is continuously evolving. It doesn't ever stop. We always get better science. We always get better technology. So it's a moving target, and GFSI does an excellent job of staying on top of that. So this particular slide here shows 12 different GFSI benchmark schemes. The ones that really are part of the produce world is, of course, the Global Gap, the Canada Gap, the Primus GFS. Those are kind of the three big ones. The other scheme owners are constantly updating their schemes and adding new pieces and new schemes. So right now, those are kind of the big three when it comes to benchmark for the produce industry. I've touched on this a little bit, but I'll kind of go over it in a little more detail. So the certification bodies are the groups that are in between the GFSI itself and the operations that are looking to get certified. Certification bodies are accredited by the standard owners, so BRC, SQF, FSCC 22000, Global Gap, and Canada Gap. The certification bodies have to show that they're proficient in the various schemes, and then they have the ability to go out and do the audits at the various facilities. Not every certification body is certified to all standards, so some of them pick and choose a little bit, primarily based on what is the primary and the secondary programs used in their geographical region around the world. The BRC, SQF, Global Gap, and Canada Gap standards, they are all privately owned schemes. There's no governments that own those particular schemes. And as I noted before, they are all benchmarked against the GFSI. One of the nice things about the use of benchmarking is it allows different schemes to have been developed. For example, BRC versus Canada Gap versus Global Gap. And it gives the company who is looking to become GFSI certified some flexibility. It's not a one-size-fits-all industry. So there are different standards out there. They're managed differently. They're applied differently. Some of them are much more prescriptive. Other ones are more outcome-based. So the applicant or the company that's looking to become GFSI certified has some flexibility, and they can pick or choose the scheme that fits their business and their business model the best. So, what does GFSI not do? GFSI does not set policy. They're not involved with setting regulatory standards in any way, shape, or form. They do not undertake accreditation or certification activities, except when it comes to certifying or benchmarking, I should say, the schemes themselves. Accreditation of certification bodies is done by the scheme owner. GFSI has a set of rules on how that accreditation is to take place, as well as the certification activities. There's certain procedures that the scheme owners have to adhere to, as do the CBs. I'll probably use the short form CBs for certification bodies going forward, that the CBs have to follow when they are performing the audit and the follow-up activities and all that sort of stuff. And as I've mentioned, they do not benchmark anything except food safety. They're not dealing with quality. They're not dealing with workers' protection. They don't deal with sustainability or anything like that. GFSI, you hear GFSI, you think food safety. Some of the common themes, and these will look very familiar to obviously anyone who's working under a GFSI scheme, but also anybody that's working under a HACCP program. So the most important thing with any kind of a system like this is you must have senior management commitment. They must be willing to put in the resources, both from a capital expense as well as the kind of the warm bodies that are required to carry out the work to develop and then maintain your GFSI program in plant or in the packing houses. HACCP is the foundation. HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point, and it's been around since, I guess, the 70s now, as a method or a set of rules to follow when it comes to developing food safety. Certainly you want to focus on food safety. It is GFSI. Food defense and food fraud are wrapped into that a little bit because they can certainly affect safety. Product and process oriented. So what that does is the GFSI is looking at how things are done and making sure that they are done in a manner that it makes sense, kind of from a best practice or a best food safety practice point of view. And then I won't go through the rest of the bullets there. Anyone who's familiar with a HACCP-based program will understand that. Okay? So let me touch on Canada Gap here very briefly. Canada Gap is a GFSI benchmark program which was developed here in Canada a number of years ago. It is currently under the umbrella of the CanAg Plus group, so they own the registered trademark for Canada Gap. Canada Gap is a system that is designed primarily for food handlers and growers. It's been GFSI benchmarked now for a number of years. It's based on the 7 principles of HACCP, as are all GFSI programs. Its model is primarily for production systems, so primary production systems, your growers into the pack houses to some degree, but certainly not any farther down the road when it comes to further processing or processed products. They've really defined the area that they want to focus on. The Canada Gap program, just last year, I believe, or maybe, no, it was earlier this year, was recognized by the Canadian government, the CFIA specifically, as being a model system. So if you were going to go set up a food safety program, you know, for your growing operation, Canada Gap would certainly be an excellent one to follow, as it is recognized by the Canadian government as a model system. Canada Gap also very recently went through an assessment by CFIA, and it was determined, or CFIA determined that they were greater than 99% in alignment with the new Safe Food for Canadian regulations, which came out a couple of weeks ago. So once again, that is really a ringing endorsement for the Canada Gap program. One thing, of course, you always have to remember is Canada Gap, being GFSI, deals strictly with food safety. So although they are 99% aligned with the food safety requirements in SFCR, their mandate does not deal with things like grades or labeling or packaging, unless, of course, those have a direct input or effect on food safety. They do have two separate kind of streams of programs. One is for greenhouse operations, which, as we all know, are a rather specialized way of producing fruits and vegetables, and then more your standard fruits and vegetables production systems. So I'm now going to touch on FSMA. I'm going to run through this fairly quickly. FSMA is a great, big, complicated, ponderous regulation which came out in the U.S. a number of years ago. They actually started FSMA about the same time as we started work on the Safe Food for Canadian regs, and we were actually ahead of them for a number of years, but they beat us to the finish line and published their regs just a couple of years ago. So they're already, you know, in the early stages of rolling things out and working under those new requirements. The U.S. regulations are kind of set up much differently than the way the Canadians are. At least in FSMA, that's the one I'm primarily familiar with. The FDA, who looks after the FSMA in the States, they have set up a number of rules which basically cover the various sections of the food continuum, and the 7 rules are listed there. So you've got preventive controls for human foods, preventive controls for animal food, produce safety, known as this produce rule, foreign supplier verification programs, FSVP, which we'll touch on a little bit more, third-party accreditation, sanitary transportation of food, and food defense. So they certainly take the different areas, the different topics, and put them in different buckets and handle them that way. Under Safe Food for Canadian regs, we tend to approach the various topics in a more wholesome or fulsome way, and build the various pieces into the various parts of the regulation. So it's just a different way of approaching it. One's not better or worse. It's just a different approach. So just touching on some of the produce safety features. Generally, when it comes to produce safety, I mean, the key hazard that we're concerned about is biological, at least in North America. Certainly in other parts of the world, some of the chemicals that may be used, and how they're used is certainly an issue. But in North America, it's primarily a biological issue, dealing with viruses and bacteria primarily, as well as some parasites that can be in water that can get into fruit or vegetables, for example. So we generally look at it from the biological standpoint. Some of the components that go into that, certainly the health and hygiene of workers, So those would be the folks out in the fields, those would be the folks in the packing houses, and further up the line into further processed products or minimally processed products. We want to make sure the workers are healthy. They understand the food safety requirements of their particular jobs. They understand the importance of hygiene, clean clothes, washing your hands, don't come to work if you're sick, those sorts of things. Agricultural water is a big issue when it comes to the FSMA rules. Their initial kind of draft or approach to agricultural water was an issue down in the States, in that there were some requirements in it that were really unworkable in the real world, including a very limited number of test methods, as well as some of the sampling sizes and some of the timing involved with the ag water standard. That is currently actually on hold, and they are trying to make sure they get the best possible outcome when it comes to the agricultural water rule. Hopefully you've all seen the news that came out this morning, where they've ID'd that particular E. coli that was in the recent romaine outbreak down in the U.S. and just a little bit here in Canada, primarily the U.S. They've ID'd the specific bacteria, the specific E. coli that was causing the illnesses. They did isolate it from some canal water down in the Yuma growing area. So it will be interesting to see if that has an effect on the final rule when it comes to agricultural water. I know the folks at PMA and United Fresh down south are watching it very closely and providing input and suggestions / guidance to FDA as it goes along. Biological soil amendments, so that's talking about manure and the composting rules and whatnot around it. Domestic and wild animals. Domesticated wild animals, they're certainly much easier to control, as opposed to wild animals that may be walking through your field or flying overhead. One of the issues that they're starting to look at is when it comes to domesticated animals, particularly cattle and high-density feedlots, are the movement of water through those areas, and what's downstream as the water moves through and eventually ends up possibly being used to water crops. So that's another one that's kind of interesting. Equipment, tools, building sanitation, pretty straightforward stuff. And then, of course, the activities around growing, harvesting, and packing. So the other thing that the U.S. has, they've got a set of rules for the produce safety, and they've got a set of rules for preventive controls for human foods. What's interesting about this is, depending on which rule you follow, will help to determine which GFSI scheme you may work under. So, for example, if you are a primary producer, it makes sense that you'd work under a Canada Gas or a Primus program, which are designed for those type of operations. If you are more of a minimally processed operation, then at that point you're going to fall into the BRC or the SQF set of standards, and you'd work under them. And certainly for some establishments out there that may have both a growing component as well as a further processing or processing in general, there may be situations where you want to work under two systems. You may have Canada Gas for your primary growing areas, and that then transitions to a BRC or an SQF, et cetera, as the product transitions into further processing and down the line, for example. So it's important to understand the distinction and the areas each program is designed to cover, to make sure that when you start down the road, you're putting the right controls in place. And honestly, by picking the right certification body to help you input, create your program, or a consultant who you may bring on, they will certainly be able to help you steer through the various programs. So one of the things that's interesting under the FSMA is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. This ties into GFSI in that from a global perspective, a U.S. importer, and I will touch on the Canada-U.S. piece in a minute, but if someone is shipping product from, let's say, the EU into the United States, the only way product can get in is there has to be a U.S. importer. So basically, there has to be a warm body in the U.S. with an address that FDA can go to if there's a problem with the product. A key factor of that U.S. importer is they are responsible to ensure that product that's coming in from the EU, for example, is compliant with the FSMA rule. So that would include preventive controls, that would include anything to do with water. So anything in FSMA, it's the importer, the U.S. importer, who is responsible for ensuring that. The nice thing about GFSI is, being a global standard, if you're buying from an EU company who's working under a GFSI scheme, that goes a long way to ensure that when that product shows up, at the U.S. border, that the importer can already feel very comfortable that the product will be in compliance. Obviously, they still have to do their due diligence and make sure everything is in place, but it certainly makes it easier for them. With respect to Canada and the U.S., we have the ability to work under what's called the Modified Foreign Supplier Verification Program. Back in 2016, the FDA, along with Health Canada and CFIA, signed it's called the arrangement. So basically what it means is the U.S. recognizes Canada's food safety system, we recognize theirs, and both have determined that it gives you a similar public health outcome. Now, the programs themselves, of course, aren't exactly the same. There's a big difference between FSMA and the Safe Food for Canadian regs. But the outcome, how that affects the final consumer is primarily the same. So what that allows is, it means U.S. companies can, as long as they're under FDA oversight and complying to FSMA, they can go ahead and they can export into Canada, and they can go ahead and they're free to have a Canadian importer. The import process really becomes a business decision at that point. And the reason for that is Canada also has a regulation in place dealing with non-resident importers, or NRIs. So what we say when it comes to NRIs is that if the product is coming to us from a country that we have a food safety recognition agreement with, so in this case it's between the U.S. and Canada, then there can be a non-resident importer. So the importer can actually be located in the U.S. Yes, they still have to apply for a CFIA license. The CFIA still needs to know who they are, but they don't have to have a warm body in the U.S. So that really gives businesses a flexibility on whether they want to have a Canadian importer, or whether it makes more sense for them to do it themselves out of the U.S. For Canadian firms shipping south, they need to have oversight from the CFIA, so they need to be licensed. And if you need more information on licensing, I suggest you take a look at our first webcast webinar, which had CFIN Christine Shaker talking specifically about SFCR and the licensing part and the other components. So it's worth checking out. And of course, you can always jump onto the CFIA website or call us here in the office as well as CPMA. But basically what it means is that a Canadian company that is licensed under SFCR can then ship their product into the U.S. And now they still have to have a U.S. importer, but under the modified FSMA FSVP rules, there's only 3 outstanding items that U.S. importer has to make sure the Canadian company complies to from a FSMA perspective. And those things have to do with record keeping, has to do with identification of the importer. So I believe it's their DUNS number has to be done correctly. And it talks about having to making sure that it was a qualified person that set up your program as well as a qualified person that audits it. Once again, if you're working under a GFSI program, all those three outstanding pieces, except maybe for the DUNS number, but anybody that's exporting would be with that. So anyone who's doing that would under a GFSI program, working under that, would certainly have those pieces in place. Currently, the U.S. does not permit NRIs, but there's a possibility that that could change at some point in the future. Some takeaways. I'm not going to read these. I've kind of gone over it, but you know what? The real key thing is that having that agreement in place should help to reduce the burden of products moving back across the borders. And it should help to smooth the flow of trade. Of course, it's extremely important in our business given the shelf life and perishability of the products. Safe Food for Canadians Act, once again, I'm just going to touch on this very briefly because I'm assuming a lot of you will already be familiar with it. Basically, the Act itself was published in 2012. The regulations themselves, we've been working on them for the last 6 years. They were published on the 23rd of June. They come into effect the 15th of January 2019. They do have a number of staggered coming into force dates for particular pieces of the legislation. So those are based on that January 15th date. So consider that when the starting gun goes off, not the June 23rd one. It covers all foods. It was designed to create a level playing field for domestic and imported foods. Although it is primarily a food safety regulation, it does touch on a little bit labeling, packaging, and advertising regs. And the three main components are licensing, preventive control, and traceability. As I've noted, there's lots of information on the page, or you can check out our webinar as well on this. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail around the Safe Food for Canadians Act. How can GFSI help with all this stuff? Well, the nice thing is, from a regulator perspective, by having a GFSI program in place, it will show to the regulator that you take food safety seriously, and it would be one of the things they would consider when assessing risk to an organization. An organization working under GFSI would most likely be considered a lower risk. The governments understand that they take food safety seriously, and they're working under global programs. So that gives them a sense of confidence. Unless, of course, you happen to run into a problem, which can happen, and then they'll probably bump you up the list a bit. But the good thing is it'll hopefully kind of focus the government on those higher risk companies as opposed to the lower risk one. Having a GFSI scheme means you're probably 3/4, if not closer to 90% of the way there when it comes to your preventive control plans, and particularly the record keeping, traceability, and recall programs, which are all GFSI, are there as well. As I noted before, there's different GFSI schemes, so you have the flexibility to choose the one that makes the most sense for your organization. And also some of the benefits of working under a strong food safety program. It has been shown that it can help to streamline your operations, can help to improve overall quality and customer satisfaction. In conclusion, companies working under GFSI are demonstrating, not just talking about, their commitment to food safety. It's certainly seen as a positive by the CFIA and FDA when it comes to their decisions on who they should audit and who they can bump down the list. In a lot of cases, as we know, your customers require GFSI, even if you are compliant to your particular country's food safety regime. A lot of companies now, of course, require GFSI. And I guess my last point there is to make sure you're talking to some experts, consultants, or companies such as NSF before diving in. If you're not working under a GFSI program, there's a lot of work involved with them. They're certainly well worth it in the end, but you want to make sure that you're getting the help you need. If you need more information, here are the contacts for NSF, and once again, I'd like to thank Al Grant for allowing me to use their presentation and kind of step in for them. And that's pretty much all I've got. So, Jason, if there's questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, Jeff, thanks very much for presenting. We have had a couple of questions submitted via the chat window, so if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat and I'll pass them on to the presenter. Jeff, our first question says, do you want to touch on farms defined under the produce rule not requiring FDA registration under bioterrorism? Farms are exempt and fall under the produce rule.
So I'll be honest with you, I'm not an expert when it comes to that particular part of the FSMA. So since we're talking bioterrorism, I don't really want to touch on that. But what I will do is I will take the question and I will bounce it off of one of my contacts, probably Jennifer McIntyre at United Fresh, and then we can get back to whoever asked the questions, or if we've got an FAQ going up, I'll do it that way. It's just not an area that I would want to provide incorrect information on.
Perfect. We have one question that I can address, saying, are the slides available for download? We aren't providing the slides available for download, but we are recording the presentation, and it will be available in the CPMA member area of our website. If you have a question, again, please put it in the chat. Jeff, another question. How closely aligned are the existing GFSI programs with the new SFCR and FSMA regulations?
So as I mentioned, Canada in particular is extremely closely aligned with SFCR. I don't know if they've done a line-by-line comparison to FSMA at this point. I believe it's something they were looking at. And to be honest with you, with respect to the other schemes, I'm not sure where they are when it comes to alignment. I mean, I'm going to kind of go out on a bit of a limb and say, they're going to be pretty close. They're benchmarked through the GFSI. So my guess is they're going to be pretty close. But when it comes to any time that you are, comparing a private program to, government regulations, the government regulations always take precedent. That's the law. That's what you have to follow. But by having a GFSI scheme in your facilities, you're going to be well on your way to being compliant, I think. But you always got to double check just to make sure something doesn't, pop up.
Perfect. I've just been passed a note noting about one of the slides said that the SFCR regulations appeared on June 23rd. It was actually June 13th. So just a slight correction to one of our slides there. All right. And Jeff, another one. If I'm GFSI certified, does that eliminate the chances of an audit?
No, it doesn't eliminate the chances of an audit, but it certainly will give your respective government, whether it's U.S. or Canadian, that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling, let's say, that, you are working under a program, you are committed to food safety. I mean, governments in either country have the right to audit, whenever they need to, or as part of their routine, work that they do to help protect consumers. So no, it doesn't prevent or make you exempt from having a government audit. But I think, if you have a government audit this year and you work in GFSI, I'm guessing you're not going to see the government again next year. So it's going to help you that way.
Perfect. I've just been passed another note asking me to mention that Canada GAP does cover more than primary production. The scope of the program covers production, packing, storage, repacking, wholesaling, and brokerage. And you can find information on Canada GAP and FSMA under the food safety link on their website. Another question, did you know if there was any GFSI scheme working with CFIA on their recognition other than Canada Gap?
I have not heard of any other one at this point, so I do not know.
Okay. And will the implementation of SFCR invalidate my GFSI certification?
No, not at all. They're totally separate but similar things. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the SFCR regulations are the law of the land. You have to be compliant with them if you want to stay in business. GFSI schemes are completely voluntary. Now, your customers may require one, but there's no mandate under either FSMA or the Safe Food for Canadian regs that you have a GFSI program. So one does not invalidate the other, but you always have to follow the law of the land first, and then your GFSI program second.
Okay, and it's last call for questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, Jeff, this is the last question that I have. What are the certification bodies / programs doing to ensure parity between GFSI programs and SFCR?
Well, once again, I circle back to the work done by Canada Gap and their 99 plus greater than 99% compliance with the new Safety for Canadians regs. I don't know if I would use the word parity. That kind of implies that the programs are exact. I mean, they're not. The Safe Food for Canadian regs is a program that is outcome-based, that tells you where you need to be in your food safety programs. It does not tell you how to get there. The GFSI programs, depending on which one you're following, they can either be very prescriptive and say you do this way and you do this that way and so on, or they can be more outcome-based. So it's important to choose the scheme that works best for your operations, knowing that when you have it implemented and it's up and running, it's certainly going to put you well on your way to being compliant with the regulations.
Perfect. I've had one more question come in. So again, pretty much last call for questions. If you have a question, put it in the chat. Do you think retailers are going to walk away from GFSI requirements if the growers are compliant with the new regulations?
No, I don't see that happening. An important thing to remember also is that generally government regulations are considered the minimum standards. Therefore, retailers, particularly when it's coming to the private label products and produce, because quite often consumers, when they're buying produce, think it's the kind of in their minds related to the particular chain or store they're buying from. And those chains are going to continue to want to make sure that they are providing the most food safety coverage, let's say, from their suppliers, that they are doing everything they can to help to mitigate risks. Risk is never zero, but so no, I don't see these changes affecting retail or food service, for example, asks for GFSI programs.
Perfect, Jeff. That's all the questions that I have today. Well, that I have left in the chat. So did you have any last words of advice on this particular topic?
No, I just want to encourage folks to make sure that they, that they are reading the new regs. There's a lot of very good guidance out there. And, you do want to make sure that if anything catches your eye, that you're ensuring your food safety program, which